And so, yes, we will start. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. Today marks the last of the FFAR webinar series on food waste. We have other webinars coming through throughout the year. So please check out our website to just get updates on when these webinars will be. FFAR is celebrating its 10 years anniversary, and we are really excited that we began this celebration with a series of food waste webinars. And today we are blessed and lucky to have Dr. Alex Nicholas Venriza join us from WWF. He'll be presenting on creating a unified approach to measure wait, let me get this off my screen so I can see. All right, to measure loss on farms globally. So on our agenda today, we have welcoming intros, and then Constance will come in and tell us a little bit about FFAR for folks who have not heard about FFAR or do not know about FFAR. And then she'll go ahead to introduce the PI, and then the PI will present, and there'll be some time for Q&A and closing. I'd also mention that throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, please put your questions in the Q&A box. You can find that at the bottom of your screen, and it's just labeled Q&A. Just type the questions in there, and we will have time at the end of the presentation to address any questions that you may have. All right, so we would like to take this time to also do a quick poll here, because we really want to learn more about you and just kind of the background you have, and just get a feel of that. So we will pause for about 2 minutes or so for you to complete these poll questions that will pop up on your screen in a second. So please just click and type directly on your screen, and we should be able to receive your response. So we will pause here for about 2 minutes. Okay, thanks, Tatiana. I think we're going to move on. All right, so now I will hand over to Constance to tell us a little bit about FFAR.
Thank you, Rebecca. So again, just to share with those in attendance who may not know much about FFAR, the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, FFAR, was established in 2014 by the Farm Bill. We connect funders, researchers, and farmers to pioneer the next frontier of agriculture innovation. Next slide, please. It is our mission to build collaborative partnerships that support scientific research to address today's biggest food and agriculture challenges. Next slide. And we utilize multiple funding mechanisms to support the research that we fund: competitive grants, direct awards, prizes, and consortia. And I would just like to highlight the direct awards mechanism, because the work that you'll be hearing about today was actually supported by a direct award. In direct award mechanism, basically an organization or an entity with expertise in a particular topic can submit a proposal to FFAR. Sorry about that. Can submit a proposal to FFAR, and the submitted proposal will undergo, be reviewed for scientific rigor and its alignment with our mission and vision, and only funded if it meets our criteria. So I'm really happy that we're going to get a chance today to hear about research that was actually funded using this mechanism. Next slide, please. But now I'd like to also take an opportunity to highlight 2 of our annual funding opportunities. So the FFAR has two annual competitive research funding opportunities. These are separate from our special program calls that occur throughout the year. The first one of these annual competitive opportunities is the Seeding Solutions. And in Seeding Solutions, we support bold research in any of our priority areas. And in this case, for the Seeding Solutions, grantees must provide matching funds from non-federal partners. Next slide, please. So the New Innovator Award is our second annual competitive research funding opportunity. The New Innovator Award targets early research scientists. We grant New Innovator Awards to faculty members in a tenure track position no longer than 3 years and who are within 8 years of receiving their PhD. Eligible candidates must also conduct research within that aligns with their priority areas. And with this one, matching funds are optional with this opportunity. Next slide, please. So we want to talk about food loss and food waste and why is this so important to us? So about 30% of the foods produced are wasted each year, and this is in the US and in other global settings. Food loss and waste occurs along the value chain, including production, distribution, and retail, food preparation, and at consumption as well. And this contributes to economic losses, food and nutrition insecurity, and climate change. And reducing food loss and waste has the potential to improve the economic status of various stakeholders, food availability and access, environmental conditions, and human health. And because of this, FFAR has invested nearly $15 million in research aimed at identifying innovative and effective ways to prevent and reduce food loss and waste along the value chain. Next slide, please. And so with that, I would like to introduce today's webinar presenter. It's really my pleasure to introduce Alex Nichols Vinuesa. Alex is the program manager, food waste and loss at the World Wildlife Fund, WWF. Alex supports the US food waste team's portfolio of projects, including work with the agricultural, grocery, retail, hospitality, and food service sectors. This includes work with the Global Farm Loss Tool, which we'll be hearing about today, the Food Waste Warrior Program, the Zero Waste Coalition, and the US Food Waste Pact. The World Wildlife Fund, WWF, received one of FFAR's Director Awards in 2017 to expand the organization's effort to measure farm post-harvest food loss and underutilization of specialty and commodity crops in the US. This research effort was led by Pete Pearson. Findings from the research helped inform the development of the Global Farm Loss Tool, which Alex will be discussing today. Please welcome Alex Nichols Vinuesa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. I'm going to go ahead and start to share my slides. Give me just one moment, please. Okay. Can everyone see that okay? All right. Take that as a yes.
Yes.
So, we're very grateful to be here and for the support from FFAR and from many of our partners. This is by no means an effort that was just done by WWF. A lot of the research that we've done has been alongside longtime partners and whose research really formed the foundation for the Global Farm Loss Tool, such as Dr. Lisa Johnson. So we're very grateful to that wider community that we've been working on this with. So let me take you on a bit of a background as to why this is such an important issue to us. Many of you know WWF. I just want to say that I'm, again, very grateful to be here, and I don't think many people are aware that reducing food waste is so critical for the world to address both climate change and hunger. So it's great to be here and be able to talk about that work today that we're doing. WWF is one of the largest environmental NGOs. We have a presence in over 100 countries right now with around roughly 90 offices where we work with companies, we work with governments and communities to address the world's most pressing threats to the diversity of life on Earth and trying to develop solutions that will meet the needs of both people and nature to really drive, sustainable long-term change. And yet, as I speak before you, I'm sure many of you are wondering, why are we here to talk about food waste when we're most widely known for our work to protect endangered species? The simple answer is, as you're seeing on the screen, agriculture occupies roughly 40% of the Earth's non-frozen landmass. It's the largest driver of deforestation, soil erosion, chemical and water use. And when you throw away, right, 40% of the food we produce, that means we do quite a large amount of harm to the planet to grow food that we didn't end up even using, right? And so you can imagine, obviously, in doing so, that unnecessary impact that has on ecosystems and natural life. Today, roughly 70% of biodiversity loss is as a result of farming and food production. And then, as many of you know, this also degrades our ability and our resilience to confront the extreme weather events, climate change, and the new threats to our ability to feed ourselves and our development, which we're all very keenly aware of, having just come out of a pandemic, for instance. So that's a bit of background on why we're focused on this issue. And so the latest research, and I'm going to go over this in a little bit, is that up to 40% of all the food that we produce globally is wasted, and that's up more than 30%. That builds on what FAO's research has been over time. This came after a 2021 report that was led by WWF UK and Dr. Lily DeGama and others. It was called Driven to Waste, and that really brought in a greater attention on that there is additional loss happening on farm that wasn't previously accounted for. And that was really one of the catalysts for, in addition to the work we've done with FFAR and the previous research we've done on loss on farms, but that was really a catalyst for how do we address this at a global level. And I also just want to talk about, when we say these big numbers around food loss and waste, it's hard for all of us as individuals to really connect with that at times. What that means for all of you that are listening is that the average household, this is from ReFed, one of our partners, at least here in the US, roughly $2,000 is spent a year per household on food that they then throw away, right? So it's not just about the environmental impacts, it's a financial impact. And obviously we're throwing away a lot of perfectly good food when there's still roughly 1 in 10 Americans who don't know where their next meal is coming from. And so what we're really looking to do is to be able to reduce this overall environmental impact, which I'll continue to touch on just a minute from the climate standpoint, and help to drive this transition to a more circular food system, right? And reduce the overall footprint of food so that we can use this surplus to first feed people, but then when we can't feed it as is, transform it into new processed, frozen, upcycled products, right, through new channels for this surplus that might not have a place today for it to go, to feed animals or to use it to create fertilizer to help grow more food. And the truth is that we're nowhere near close to where we need to be on that today, unfortunately, because less than 10% of all food waste is donated and only 5% is composted, at least here in the US. And then I think this is important to touch on, but as I mentioned at the top of the presentation, this is a massive climate issue as well. Again, from that Driven to Waste report, roughly 10% of emissions come from food waste. And when we talk about where it's happening, there's both the embedded emissions in producing that food, which we know are happening at the beginning of the food system at the agricultural level. We also know that there's a huge amount that's happening at the landfill level at the end of life of food. It's the #1 input into landfills here in the US, which are the 3rd largest source of methane. The EPA just came out with a great report on that several months back that I would recommend, that really shows what a huge chunk, I believe it's around 60% of those methane emissions are driven by the decomposition of food in an anaerobic environment. And again, if we're able to avoid these upstream emissions, you're able to really try to prevent what is all of those embedded emissions that come with food, right? Because the majority, as you can see in the middle there, of the emissions have already occurred by the time it hits your dinner plate, right? And so the last thing that I'll leave you with, just to think about this in terms of scale, is that if you took all of the land used to produce food that was lost or wasted just on farms, not throughout the rest of the supply chain, but just on farms, it would be an area larger than the Indian subcontinent. And that's again from our Driven to Waste report. So it's a climate issue. It's bigger than the overall the aviation sector, which we hear a lot about in terms of it being a growing threat. But it's one that really has so many co-benefits as we solve it, not just for climate, but for feeding people and to helping to move this circular food transition forward. I will say now, to flip from the gloom and doom, I know that you all are very aware of, is that the good news is that in our work, as you heard in my intro, we work with a lot of different food companies right now that are interested in reducing their food loss and waste. And this is really starting to normalize and mature. We're still a long ways away from where we need to go, but we see governments leaning in on this. We run a public-private partnership that was started by the leadership across the 3 western states of the U.S. on the Pacific Coast, California, Washington, Oregon, and then many of their largest cities, to really develop a way for companies to come together and learn from one another pre-competitively and to start to regularly report on their food loss and waste. And that's now gone from just a West Coast focused initiative to now one that's across the entire country called the U.S. Food Waste Pact. Supply chains are asking for this information. Many of you are aware of initiatives like 10 by 20 by 30, the 10 largest food businesses, 20 of their largest suppliers, reducing food loss and waste in half by 2030, which is run by our partners WRI. And then you have many of the other logos and or associations you see in there that are also making concerted efforts with their members to both measure and reduce their food loss and waste. And so that's one positive trend you might be able to say. And the other is just that, again, there's such a huge benefit to reducing food loss and waste, right? There's on average 8-to-1 return, at least here in the US. That number changes when you look at it globally. It's even higher. And so when you think about what you can do for overall making an impact on climate change and then again realizing some of these other co-benefits, this has such a straightforward return. And it's also, as you'll see in the report that ReFed has put out, it's a way to create new jobs. It's and so when we develop new organic waste infrastructure, or as we create new markets for surplus that previously was just being left on the farm and tilled under, now you're finding new jobs and new revenue streams to sell those through, maybe as an upcycled product, let's say. And so this is something that helps us give us hope and what I think that we try to talk to when we meet with businesses and in policymakers. And so you might have also heard in our introduction, we're not trying to just help businesses to reduce food loss and waste in their own operations, but to also publicly support common sense and bipartisan policy change through efforts led by groups like the Zero Food Waste Coalition, which we're a founding member of. And we're working on very closely through the Farm Bill right now here in the US. So to bring it now to what we want to talk about specifically and on the Global Farm Loss Tool, we were very fortunate again to receive funding from FFAR, and that really kicked off what was called our No Food Left Behind research series. And so we've put out now 6 reports. So this is just a few of those, part 1, part 2, and part 3, which started to collect primary data on farm loss, which has been a major gap in the overall food system because it's not easy to collect. And again, this is where Dr. Lisa Johnson's research really played a major part, is how do you practically start to sample and measure loss to get an estimate of how much is happening. And so for these first couple of reports, that's what we were able to do with several products, lettuce, apples, blueberries, and really get a sense of just the extent to loss that's happening right now, particularly in specialty crops. And then again, that was built on at a more global level. That was more US focused, the No Food Left Behind research. But this Driven to Waste report, which was led by WWF UK, really estimated how much loss is happening on farms globally right now. And so the genesis there then was, look, we've got regional tools available. We worked to develop something called the SISC tool, which allows growers in specialty crops, fruits and vegetables, that is, to be able to estimate their losses in the US. Our partner RAP has also developed a methodology that they use in a lot of their work around the world. And there was a large list of different methodologies. And we said to go after this issue of food loss and waste on farms, you have to figure out a harmonized way to collect this data. Because for us as solution providers in the NGO world or policymakers, you ultimately have to get your arms around what are the biggest drivers of this loss, what are some of the biggest hotspots in terms of where it's happening the most frequently, so that you can start to bring in resources, right, and solutions to address it, which all of you as a research community can appreciate. And so that was really the birth of, let's try to develop what is now the public beta version of this tool called the Global Farm Loss Tool. And again, I don't pretend to stand here and take credit for it. We were just lucky to be a part of it and to help lead some of it. We worked with many of the groups you're seeing here on the screen, and it's meant to be a very simple tool again, building on Dr. Lisa Johnson's research, that growers can do. And if you're talking about specialty crops, you can do this in an hour and go in and start to sample and then extrapolate to get an estimate for the total losses that are happening on farms. And we've been able to not just do this in a research setting, but we've been able to work with a set of growers that are part of Consumer Goods Forum, which I'll go over in a minute, to really test this and give us feedback to make sure this is practical and easy to use for their operations. So I touched a little bit on this already, but again, there was a whole number of different tools that we wanted to harmonize. We needed better information, and we don't want to just collect loss. Like, loss as an overall category isn't that helpful or actionable. What we really tried to break down was, again, following Dr. Lisa Johnson's research and methodology, is how much of what is being left behind could be sold through your traditional sales channels today, which we would call marketable. How much of it is maybe too small, too large, it might be a little bit more bruised, but it's edible. So how much is in that edible bucket of what's being left behind? And then third, what's spoiled and couldn't be fit for human consumption, but could be used for instance, composting or in other circular channels. And so, that was the thought. And then we bring in some of the elements of all the different tools that we reviewed as part of this research project. And so we don't want this to just be measurement for measurement's sake. We really want this to kickstart conversations between growers and their buyers around, hey, how can we use more of what we're growing today that's edible? Because at the end of the day, long term, if we're able to get more of this food, which is being produced anyway, right, at the expense that we talked about at the beginning, to people, over time, it reduces the need of the overall amount of food production to feed the world. Because today, so much of it just doesn't get to people. So the beta test that we ran, you can see an example of some of the crops, some of the regions. We truly want to make this global, but the way that we look at it today is that we are in a very iterative and development phase where, we're not done. This isn't the end of it. We haven't just released it and now we're calling it good. This is meant to be something we continue to build out based on feedback, because again, we really want this to be useful to a wide variety of crops and regions, and we know there's going to be very, very unique needs for each of those characteristics. So we were lucky enough to partner with Consumer Goods Forum, which has a specific working group called the Food Waste Coalition of Action, to beta test this. And I think it'd be helpful for you all to hear directly from them. And so we have a quick video where they are going to share what they saw the value in testing the tool with us over the last year.
The most useful insight that we gained from using the global farm loss tool was that it allowed our team for the first time to properly estimate the food loss produced during harvest season, specifically for the province of New Brunswick. Essentially, the tool provided us with insights in how big the total loss was, but also in how much each category, meaning the marketable, the non-marketable, but edible, as well as the spoiled categories, contribute to each loss. For example, in our case, we saw the biggest loss pertaining to the marketable category. This in turn allowed us to map out where improvements could be made for future reference. In the beginning, we had to make sure how to differentiate between the marketable category and the non-marketable, and this is specific to what we consider marketable in relation to what the plants can process, the type of potatoes they can process. We do plan to use a global farm loss tool moving forward, as this was the first iteration, meaning that this provided us with a baseline. When we carry out future trials, we have something to reference. We can see if there's been improvements made in our harvesting technique, and if there's not. I believe that these types of tools give us insights in more aspects than we might account for in the beginning. And from there, especially with food production, we want to minimize that loss as much as possible and gain insights in how we can do so.
I would say the most useful part of using the global farm loss tool was being able to capture data over a wider data set than we look at for the traditional packing metrics that we use. We're usually focused on getting in the moment data or data for each individual piece of the production process. But using the global farm loss tool, we were able to have a view of the overall numbers by commodity. And that's helpful in understanding waste and getting a view of just how much waste we're generally getting in the process. And so the global farm loss tool helps with providing more focus on that not marketable piece and gives a view of spoilage as well. And it provides reporting on how much falls into these categories. And it helps standardize that language around what is marketable, non-marketable, and spoilage. We're focused on the facility end and the post-harvest process, but we can target improvements in the field as well with the tool. And I can see us using the tool moving forward and kind of bringing that out to our farms as well, because it is easy to use.
The most useful aspect, I think, of the global farm loss tool was actually how relatively simple it made the field sampling, because it was fairly clear what was required and you weren't looking to measure product that was never going to be sold. The tool is simply asking for the marketable product, and it differentiated it between the three main categories of marketable, edible but not marketable, and not edible. It became a very useful piece of information. I think that in theory there's a range of uses that could be developed from the global farm loss tool in terms of staff training, harvesting equipment setup and maintenance for mechanically harvested crops, and even broader aspects of looking at loss in relation to forward planning of field selection, varietal selection of different products, etc. You couldn't assume that you were going to make changes to your marketing until you knew what you were talking about, which is why you have to measure first and then manage. Taking, for example, the broccoli that I've measured this year, there's not enough waste to justify doing anything with it. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So you have to measure it first.
Well, I think David said it best, right? We can't start to manage this problem until we've really gotten a simple way to start to measure it. And so it was great to have all those folks participating in it, and we deeply appreciated their time. And I think you can start to see the wheels in motion again. And again, we don't want to just measure for measurement's sake to say this is how much loss. We want it to be actionable, and we want it to spur new operational changes or new discussions around how do we perhaps sell or donate more of this. Great. I'm going to actually just walk you through the tool briefly here as well. You know, I encourage all of you to go globalfarmlosstool.org and check this out. This is free to use and to start testing. But when you come in, again, we really tried to strip down. There's a lot of different methodologies out there, and we were trying to take the best of each and just strip it down to the most basic needs for farmers to be able to go out and start to estimate their loss. Because I think as researchers, we're tempted to want to add in every little thing because the data is interesting to us. We really took the approach that we had to be quite lean, and then we'll slowly add on over time, which is why that user feedback piece is going to be so important. So when you come in, what do you see? You're simply going to get a dashboard, right? And these are different entries that you'll have filled out, and that's where you could hear one of the interviewees talk about, like, over time they're going to be able to track how these dashboards compare to one another, and then along the top it's going to average that for them, right? You can quickly filter to see through entries if you've got quite a few of them by typing the name of how you've titled the entry, by the type of crop that it is, if it's a draft, if it's been submitted, by date. So it's meant to be kind of almost that user experience that you get from consumer grade tool. That's the intention, so that it's really simple to use. And when you come in, you can actually click this drop down. It will break down how much loss is occurring at different stages, because the tool allows you to measure not just in field, but at further stages as well. Think about transport, processing, storage. You can choose what those are. but it allows you to see that breakdown, and then you can click the report button to pull it down and get more detail. But because we're going to have a mobile application that works both online and offline for growers to take in the field, we wanted to experience for desktop, which is what this is for now, to be very, again, stripped down, simple, and streamlined, because then it will mirror that when we move to mobile. When you come in, we try to keep it pretty basic. Type in what do you want to call the entry so you can find it later. You pick your crop, which is a drop down, so that we have some data integrity over time for us as sort of the aggregators of this information. And so people aren't spelling the word apple 10 different ways, and then you have no way to really compare against one another or look for trends and benchmark. So crop, and then you can fill in variety. And then we are interested to know, because they're often harvested so differently, if it's for the fresh or the processing market. Next, there's 3 categories, and then you track your progress up here in the top right. You're going to put down high-level harvest information, when it occurred, how big of the area you harvested, and what was your total yield, because that's used in calculations later on. But you do have a couple optional questions around maybe you've lost a certain amount because of weather pre-harvest, and you had it's not considered loss until it's grown to the point of maturity, so it won't count towards your overall loss number. But we do want to start to track, given the effects of extreme weather and climate change, how much loss pre-harvest is happening. So you fill that in where it says immature, and then maybe you had labor constraints, or there were some issues with the actual operations of harvest, and so you had certain areas that weren't harvested at all. And so you can put those in here for walk by, and that is included in your loss figures in total. Next, you're going to move to in-field, which you're not required to. An example would be processing potatoes, let's say, where, or David in the video said broccoli really didn't have a lot of loss to justify doing anything. So next year, David might not even choose in-field, and so could just go to further stages. But I do want to note that you can do multiple sample areas. So you could do one that might be where you're trialing certain more sustainable practices, and then you could compare it to another area of the field, which is more of a control with traditional production. And so you can add as many of these sample areas as you want. You're going to put in how big the area is, which will default to your entire operation you put in the first tab, but then you override it. You can put in and override the total yield that we'll have calculated using the average yield per hectare or per acre. And then you're going to put in your sample sizes, which, we try to at least encourage you to do 3, but you're going to choose the width and the length of those rows, and then how much marketable, edible, and spoiled loss you found in each. And that then forms the basis of the total loss per hectare or acre, whatever you're choosing, to do the projections later on. I will note that we tried again to make this pretty painless for when you come in and you register. If you say that you're anywhere outside the US, it's going to default to the metric system. So when you choose your location on the dropdown, that will auto default, versus if you're in the US, it'll switch to, obviously acres, pounds, etc. The next piece of it is where you can describe if you had any concerns in your samples. Maybe you weren't sure of the process the first time, or there were some conditions that made it difficult to collect the data. It was raining cats and dogs, whatever, the issues might be, you can capture that. And then you're able to put in the destinations for the loss and the percentage overall of how much went. For infield, we're defaulting it to, this is an older screenshot, but it will default to tilled under or tilled or plowed in, because the majority of people that are leaving it in field, it's just going to get tilled back under, and they're not going to actually be putting it to another destination. So it'll default to that, and then folks can override and change it. And then they can also put in the reasons for the loss on the right. Over time, we're going to make these required, but again, for simplicity, we started it with just making it optional. The destinations in particular are going to be important as we add on components to be able to estimate the greenhouse gas emissions associated with these losses. So over time, note that will be required. That's just a really quick overview, but we do have a video that walks you through the tool. So when you go to globalfarmlosstool.org, there's a really quick video that you can watch. There's several blogs that we have that go into more detail on what you saw in the video of what the value was and why we're doing this. There's an in-field worksheet that you can take in the field for now, since the mobile app's not ready offline, that you could go on a clipboard, fill it out. That's what I've often done when I'm doing these. And then you come back and enter it in the tool. And then we also have a measurement guidance manual on the website as well, which just breaks down, again, the methodology and with pictures of how to do this in the field. Couple last things, and then I would love to hear from all of you and get some time for questions. We really, again, wanted to focus on the user experience. We know that you can build a tool, but if you don't make it simple and valuable to use, you're never going to get the adoption, and then it's just going to sit on a website, right? So we really wanted to make this to be an easy experience, and I look forward to people's feedback so that we can keep iterating on that. It doesn't just track loss for loss's sake. We're really trying to break it down across more actionable categories, and you heard that in the video about how valuable that was. We're also looking at in the future being able to bring in the financial component so that you could say, okay, this is how much I know that I could get for marketable product, and you could just input that amount and multiply it by the total amount of marketable loss you have to really make that business case, right? This is how much money we're leaving on the table. We're not even talking about developing new channels for edible, just how much marketable loss we had. And then it allows you to be able to take this data and share it. I mean, I showed you the experience for growers. You can also sign up as an aggregator, right? So you could be a grocery store or large food manufacturer, and then you could ask your growers to go in and fill this data out, and then they would share it with you so that you could look at how loss compares across, your entire supply chain, right? So this allows that conversation to happen. We know that growers can't do this alone. They need the support of their buyers to really act on what they're finding in the tool. I hinted at this, but these are the gaps in the next steps for us. We want to bring in Scope 3 emissions. And so we're looking at working with partners that you're seeing here on the screen, like Wageningen, so that we can start to take some of the great research that they've done and build that, early capabilities of just being able to estimate the losses that are associated with what is measured as in the tool. We want to make sure this tool is valuable for more crops. We know that we've got a very heavy lean towards fruits and vegetables. This can be used for any plant-based crop right now, but when you're going through and looking at how many tomatoes were left post-harvest, that's a lot different than doing it with something like quinoa or rice. And so we want to make sure that we make tweaks to the methodology and the guidance so that it's easy for all different types of crops. We're going to be making this available in different languages, probably Spanish to start. And just building out more reporting capabilities so that it's, again, more and more valuable. Things like being able to estimate the financial value of what was lost. And then finally, the mobile version, which will be available in the near term, both so that you can take this when you're connected and when you're offline out in the field. All right, I think that is my last slide, FFAR team. So thank you for bearing with me. I know I went through a lot, but I would love to open it up for questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex. That was a great presentation. This tool looks like an amazing tool, and we are very proud of the work you've done in this space. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Okay.
So before the presentation started, we did a pre-survey, and we saw that from the responses we got, that folks wanted to learn more about this topic and also the key findings. So now we are going to do a post-survey where we want to learn more about what you learned and what you enjoyed about this webinar. So I will pause for a quick 2 to 3 minutes for us to do this quick survey. So Tatiana, if you could pop that up. Thank you. All right, probably give away for about a minute more. I'm trying to count 60 seconds in my head, but I think, yeah, we should, yeah, be good to go. Thank you all for providing your response. Now I'm going to hand it over to Constance to take us through the Q&A session. And if you have not yet entered your question, please do so now. Constance?
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Alex. And we have our first question talking about economic incentives. And so our first question is, who benefits economically from food loss and how that offsets the economic benefits of reducing it? So can you care to comment about this? And this is something I've had actually in multiple places when we've had discussions around food waste and food loss, and that question has come up multiple times. Who really gains from food loss?
I mean, there's people much smarter than me that can probably speak to this at length, but I wouldn't say that it's a zero-sum issue, maybe kind of how I'm seeing in the framing, because no one is benefiting today from it being left in the field. And I would be hard-pressed to think of it. I think that any grower wants to have zero loss. They're not interested in continuing to leave all of their hard work out there unharvested and unsold in the field. There's a variety of issues that drive them or lead to them not being able to utilize it. And so they're very interested. Once they measure and see how much and again, it's broken down in these actionable buckets, they're very motivated to try to do things, but they need the support of that end buyer, for instance, in a lot of cases. I will say that when you talk about downstream, this gets a little, I mean, we're talking upstream today in this research project. You could talk about perverse incentives with where waste goes as far as destinations, right? Food is the number one thing that we're throwing into landfills. And so it's obviously good business for those that are hauling waste to landfills to, have that being hauled because it's part of their service. I do think, though, that, over time, they're hopefully going to, and I've seen this already, them focusing on additional infrastructure and ways to keep that out of a landfill and it being recycled in another way. So that's as best as I can give you today.
Yeah, thank you. I also wonder whether, thinking about, so even if we're working towards reducing loss at the farm and then be downstream, so loss during transportation, at the retailers, at the consumers, then farmers have to produce more. Do you think farmers then are gaining from that?
From producing more, I don't understand.
So let's say if consumers are wasting more food, there's
Oh,
more
right.
food waste. So do farmers then have to produce more to meet that demand? Would you say there's an economic benefit to them in that case?
Unfortunately, there would be in that scenario, which I mean, you can't just do this in isolation, right? This is why we do things that are called more of a whole chain project where you're working at this at multiple hotspots. So you're not just kind of creating leakage or, a whack-a-mole scenario where you're just reducing it here and it's going up somewhere else. You do need, and we do have to work with consumers to, for instance, take more of these products that don't meet traditional market specs, that don't look perfect, right? And I think that over time, you'll see that acceptance, especially if you can offer it at a discount. So in your scenario, though, just to play that out, if there was more food wasted, the grower still benefits by having to perhaps produce more food to meet with that demand if demand then went up because they're not eating all the food that they're buying and hence buying more food. That would be kind of a perverse incentive. The farmer would benefit. But again, I think that's a very hypothetical and I don't want to make it sound like that's what we're seeing. But just to play that out, that's how I would see it. And we're looking at trying to do things and get people away from just focusing on their own food loss at their single point in the overall supply chain. To make this circular transition, you have to do this holistically.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been that increasing call for having the whole value chain analysis of understanding the issue around food loss and food waste. Thank you
Absolutely.
so much. Yeah. We have another question. And this Venkatesh says, we learn measuring helps managing. Can you elaborate how managing works? So when you talk about, when we measure, we better manage. So what is that? When you say managing, what do you mean?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you that it doesn't have one single answer. So the video is a great illustration of it, right? Some folks were talking about how they really wanted to focus on just the marketable product. Okay, so managing to them could be, do we need to look at the equipment that we're using? Because we know when we've done this with soy and with corn, that some of the drivers behind the loss, some of the main ones were that using older equipment, right? Where a lot of loss was happening because of that. So they looked at, is it equipment related? Is it training related? When we've done this with certain crops, it led to, do we need to coach or train our crews differently to change some of their practices? That could be, again, managing. But managing is more broad than that. I think when you say manage the issue, right, not necessarily it's about doing something just your own operations. It's also dependent upon, again, the actors further downstream. And so it's when we've done this with growers, they said, great, with this data, I can now then go talk with, my sales and my marketing teams so that they can have conversations with our customer or with our buyers, right, to see if they can help us with, taking more of this product that might be that edible portion of it. So it's really ground up in terms of what the solutions are. The tool is meant to frame the problem and to get your arms around it because it's been such a gap. It's having access to primary, on-farm loss data, but it's then on the grower and their buyers to think about what are the things that we can do to manage it out.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that, I'm curious to know what the adoption. I know you just done the beta testing, you're rolling it out, but what's been the feedback from producers, the adoption, the interest in it? What has been that? What have you seen in that area? And then also thinking about the buyers, are they taking advantage of using this tool as well?
We're early days. We just launched in April. We've had really good feedback in terms of what the user experience is for the tool, which makes me happy because, again, I was very focused on ensuring that when you get in, it's not hard to use, it's intuitive. And so we've made good progress there versus when we started. And, at the very beginning, you're just trying to do that harmonization and build it out and create what's called a beta version. And then I think we're moving into the next version of the beta, this public beta, and we'll continue to make it better. So the user experience feedback has been really good, Constance. And then from an interest standpoint, like you heard from the growers who are part of the beta, many of them want to continue to use the tool, right? And they only used an early version of it, which is exciting. We have lots of partners that are focused on developing new markets for surplus. They're very interested in using it to prove that what they're taking is really surplus and wouldn't otherwise have a market. That's exciting. The buyers, for instance, I'm going to put a link here, and if you could share this with the group, we ran a whole chain project last year for both potatoes and strawberries. And that's an example of where they were also able to use this as part of the measurement component to loss on farms of that overall project. And they're continuing to look at how can they use that in other commodities. So people, for the most part, when you think about adoption, these companies like that are part of Consumer Goods Forum or the U.S. Food Waste Pact or otherwise, they've set commitments to reduce food loss and waste. And so they've overall been very excited. And you can see that in the press release. There's a lot of companies, Tesco and Walmart and, again, Consumer Goods Forum members that have said, that this is going to be valuable in those efforts.
All right, thank you. If you're thinking about talking about adoption and the feedback that has come from farmers, I know we have in the US, we have different sizes of farms, small farmers, large huge operations. How has that adoption been across those differences in terms of farm sizes? And then also, if you don't mind commenting about, let's say, across certain demographics, because we do know that we have different farmers from different demographics here in the US as well. How has the adoption been across those groups?
Well, I can only tell you from the beta, like I shared in the screen earlier, you had a variety of regions. You had Austria, Canada, England, Scotland, South Africa, Turkey, the United States. And so that was just the beginning of the beta. And we hope to have that expanded just through those companies that we worked with. And now we're partnering with other groups. I'll give you an example. With WRI has their 10 by 20 by 30. They're now going to be looking at launching 10 by 20,000 by 30 that really looks to support smallholder farmers. We're looking at how can we potentially support that effort because it's really focused on smallholder farmers. There's other partners as well that we're talking to where we're hoping to be able to offer the tool as a way for them to continue their work and reducing loss. And so the tool is meant to be used by all sizes of farmers, but to be very frank, I think that, again, a grower to use this tool just on their own is not nearly as impactful as if they can do it with a buyer, which is why we started with, can we test this through some of our large partners who are buyers, because then they're able to come in and provide potential support for creating a new frozen or a processed product or an upcycled product, let's say, or some other form of support. So we think that that's probably the winning combination based on previous no food left behind research that we've done. But we want this to be available to everyone. And that's why, again, I'm looking for feedback to keep iterating in the year ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I had a question about the tools. I know some questions are still coming up, but would you care to comment about the use of the tool outside of the US? I saw the list of countries that were listed and that you shared. And there are some countries in Europe, in Africa, and I'm thinking those are really different different characteristics, really, in terms of farms, but even think about issues in language, the adoption, the use of technology. How do you see this tool being used in such places?
I think that first and foremost, we've listed out, and I've put a pretty comprehensive list of of crops so that anyone can come in and they can, if I missed any, there's the option to put other to add another one in. I think that we have to work with partners who are already focused on this issue and be able to then leverage their expertise to tell us, hey, this is what needs to be added to the tool for this to be effective. Rice is a perfect example. We already know there's some issues that we need to address, adding in questions around moisture content, for instance, so that it's actually an effective measure of how much loss is happening in rice, so that rice producers all over the world can now use the tool. And we're getting that feedback from a partner. And so I think that for us to have the adoption scaled, we need to work again with groups like 10 by 20,000 by 30 and others, so that as they work in these different regions, they can surface what are the key requirements or changes we need to make the tool for it to really be useful. But we also need to add more language support. Again, we've just talked about in the near term, based on our limited resources, can we start with Spanish and then from there continue to expand? We're going to be continuing to host now webinars so that people understand how to use the tool. And then again, it's being shared out through, both NGOs, but then at some point we want our partners to then, offer it to cooperatives, let's say, or other extension agents, people that are working with producers on the ground so that they know that this is available and something people can use. Okay.
Thank you. And I want to thank Said Hassan, who has shared some feedback on the question about what's the economic incentives for, and think about food loss and food waste. So thank you so much, Said, for sharing your response and views on this. Alex, I know we are running out of time, but I want to give you, I have one more, it's really not a question. I know the issue about food loss and food waste is something that is in many people's minds, that people are concerned about this for many reasons, as you did discuss in your presentation. What is the one takeaway you want to leave for those, for those of us who are in today's webinar attendance? What is that one thing, actionable thing that we can do, whether it is individually, whether it is with the various organizations that we work with or we are in contact with, that we can do when it comes to food loss and food waste? And then also, what is that key message, could be one, could be multiple, that you want us to leave with today from this session?
Look, I think like all of you, I get overwhelmed by the crises that we're facing, right? Whether it's climate change, it's pollution, it's biodiversity loss. And so I think that when we think about the power or the potential of food loss and waste, no one is against food loss and waste, right? You talked about perverse incentives maybe, but you're really stretching. Most people, this is a fairly middle of the road, non-controversial way to make progress on hunger to make progress on climate change and on trying to reduce the footprint of food. And because the majority of these impacts comes at the farm level, when we talk about the impacts of food, we see this as a simple tool to get started with framing the problem. At the very least, framing it, being able to know what its associated impacts are, like Scope 3 emissions in the future, so that then that management piece can be something that is really intuitive, because solving it, right, from a financial standpoint, like I talked about, is really straightforward. You know, you need the help of your buyers, you need to be able to sell this, but in addressing food loss and waste, it's at the end of the day good economically for the producer. And so we want to help them to be able to do that. We feel like they want it as well, and we're trying to provide more support for them in being able to tackle this issue. So all of us in raising awareness of this and how this is, again, such a win-win-win, non-controversial way to make progress against so many of these crises, I think is the way that we can start to move forward.
Thank you. Thank you. And now I'll turn it back to Rebecca, who will, oh, there is one more question before, or actually one more comment. Okay, there is a comment from Venkatesh. He's saying, this is common, I think, Alex, there's always room for producing more by more efficient production practices and improvements in farming. That's something we want to think about. The farm loss tool can perhaps expand into measuring estimated losses due to current inefficient practices, and perhaps advise some improvements to potentially produce more compared to current production. I think maybe that is something you agree with as well, but please feel free if you want to comment on that, if that's an area that the farm loss tool can actually move into.
I think it's meant to spotlight inefficiency, so I agree. There's always room for improvement. That's what this is. That's the management piece of this, right? If you can measure what are the specific losses, what are the drivers behind it, how do you compare over time, as we able to provide kind of a benchmark of, you know, how much loss is happening per crop type or per region, right? It gives you a sense of how you can continue to improve. So I agree with the sentiment of what you put there. Thank you.
Thank you. I thank everybody for sharing your questions with us and your comments with us. I'm going to turn it back to Rebecca. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Constance, for facilitating such a great discussion and Q&A session. I would like to say a big thank you to Alex for being part of this big FFAR 10-year anniversary celebration and sharing your work that you've done in food waste. And also to our attendees for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us to learn more about this. If you want to learn more about Alex's work, please contact him. His information is also on our webpage or the registration page. And today marks the end of our food waste webinar series. But as I mentioned in the beginning, FFAR is doing a series of webinars throughout the year as part of our 10-year anniversary celebration. So next month, we are going to move towards plant health. So please join us on the 21st and go to our event page to learn more and register for that. So thank you all once again and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you and bye-bye.